It's 6 o'clock. I'll declare the meeting open and with an acknowledgement of country. We start the recording? Yep. Gala Kadich Wajuk Mort, Kayan Kajik Nija, Walilok Buja, where Jinang Wajuk Kadijin, where Nyiting Bula Yeye. We acknowledge the Wajuk people as the traditional owners of the Greater Fremantle Walyulup area and recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important today. So welcome everyone to the November meeting of the Planning Committee. It's quite a long agenda. We'll try and get through it as efficiently as possible. First item is attendance, apologies and leaves of absence. I don't believe there are any. No. Disclosures of interest by members. None. Responses to previous questions taken on notice. None. Public question time. This is an opportunity for people to ask questions on items that are not on tonight's agenda. That's not on tonight's agenda. Items of general nature or about other matters. Are any of those? No. Petitions, deputations, presentations by members. Confirmation of minutes. Move the approval of the minutes of the Planning Committee of the 5th of October. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Graham. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Elected member communication. So we move on to the reports on the agenda. I'm first going to ask, if it's going to be a long night, if there's anybody who would like to make a presentation about an item on the agenda and not wait for that item to come up at the committee, because that could be 8:30, 9 o'clock. So if so, would you introduce yourself, tell us which item it is? Just come up to the microphone. You have 3 minutes. You'll hear a small alarm shortly before the 3 minutes is up. I will ask you to draw to a close. So which item is it, sorry? Just wait till we get the microphone on. 28 Bromley Road, so that's the last item, isn't it? That's item 7, yep, thank you. And you are the neighbour?
Correct.
Yeah, so if you've got 3 minutes, if you'd like to explain your point of view. Thank you.
Okay. So my children and I are the residents at 30 Bromley Road, neighbouring 28 Bromley Road on its southern boundary. I'm here to object to the conditional approval of the ancillary dwelling at the boundary of my property. While I'm satisfied that there will be no negative effect on the installed solar system on the roof, I remain concerned about the impact of the building on the amount of natural daylight entering my main living space and the adjoining kitchen. The officer's report displays a photograph of the side of my house and asserts that as the highlight windows are in the shadow of the eaves of the house, that there will be minimal light entering the living space. Ambient light does not behave in the way suggested by this observation and instead bounces off surfaces, losing energy as it does so. The wall at the boundary would mean ambient light would only be able to enter the highlight windows through a narrow strip of sky a meagre 450 millimetres wide, significantly less than is currently the case. On the 30th of October at midday, I measured ambient light in the spaces with a calibrated lux meter with all window coverings fully open. I then attached obstructions to the boundary fence line for one highlight window only to give a vertical obstruction at a height of approximately 2.2 metres, half a metre less than the elevation of the proposed building, and took the same measurements again. The measurements were as follows: 160 lux before to 40 lux at the highlight window. That is a 75% reduction. And from 26 lux to 9 lux in the kitchen, that is a 65% reduction. I can therefore conclude that the planning officer's statement that the impact on light will be minimal is incorrect and is in fact significant. I use the space for domestic purposes and work associated with my employment as a teacher daily, and also use the area for painting and art. My children also use this space for many different activities, many of which rely on light. Turning on lights so that there is adequate lighting in the living area and kitchen strikes me as being at odds with the environmentally conscious Fremantle Council approach. I don't know the origins of how the boundary setback requirement came to be, but I suggest that in a case such as this, the requirement of the boundary setback would appear to be wholly appropriate should the desire be to keep the ancillary dwellings placement as per the submitted plans. I therefore respectfully ask that the Planning Committee reconsider the conditional approval of building the ancillary dwelling as per the plan submitted and impose the requirement for the minimum boundary setback. Alternatively, a placement of the ancillary dwelling in the southern corner of the block at the boundary line may be agreeable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the neighbour? No. Thank you. So if you want to go home now, you can watch online. It's live online, or you can contact the officers tomorrow to find out what the decision is. Thank you. Thank you. Item 1 is Sterling Highway, Ford Motor Company and Matilda Bay Brewery. It's a JDAP application and it's recommended for refusal. I've got 4 people wishing to speak in favour of the officer's recommendation, which is against the approval. Is there any particular order that you want to go in, or has you written down? So I've got Martin Grounds first. Martin, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and 3 minutes, please. And you're a near neighbour to the south, I think, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I own 2 properties in Thompson Road and 1 property in Coventry Parade, very, very close to the development. I've just managed to bring the wrong paper, so I'm going to have to do my 3 minutes by memory. The major objection that I had to the scheme was that the southeast corner was of Tower Block 2 was directly on the boundary of the site, and when you came up Thompson Road, you had a tower block right on the boundary in front of you before you turned left into Coventry Parade, and it was no acceptable interface with the North Fremantle community. In fact, it was an affront, really. And the architects contacted me after I made my comments about this, and we had a good discussion, and they have set the building back by 15 metres and lowered the height of the tower block 2 substantially and reduced the overshadowing at least to the corner of Thompson Road and Coventry Parade. And I feel that they have made the right kind of moves with respect to looking to respect the comments that at least I made, and I think others made as well. So from that point of view, I think the architects are trying hard to do something towards the desires of the community. However, the traffic reports in the council's agenda mention Coventry, mention McCabe Street traffic, mention Sterling Highway traffic, and virtually ignore traffic through Thompson Road that will come into the building and then go through to McCabe Street and then go out through Coventry Parade as well. And I feel it's a pity that the traffic management hasn't looked at what's happening through Thompson Road. I'm a little confused in that it seems like the report done by the council is done, and here I am being asked to make a submission should I want to, and it feels like I'm talking to something that is the horse is well and truly bolted. However, I may be wrong about that, but it certainly feels like a strange thing that one is asked to make comment on something that is already written, reported, and heading towards JDAP. I don't know whether my comments could possibly find their way into the report. Anyway, height. This development being proposed is is coming down to a large amount of question with respect to height. And I'm concerned that the 2015 adoption of height regulations for the site by the council, you only have to look at the two diagrams in the council report to see what a dead boring, architecturally hopeless result would come from adhering to the council height requirements. And it is a real pity that this proposal being put forward by Cox Howlett on behalf of their clients is not being looked at with a lot more merit with respect to using 3 tower blocks to reduce the bulk of what is on this site.
So could I ask you to, I'll give this a major item, I'll give you another minute, but if you could draw to a close, please.
Yeah, sure. It's my last point, and I just feel that the way to, I'm an architect, um, looking at the development of this site, if you extend the medium density of North Fremantle into this site, you're going to end up with buildings spread all over the site and no space within the overall site. What's happening with the development at the moment is it provides a lot of open space within the site, and I think it has a lot of merit. And there's far too much being put on to the overshadowing and the fact that it's not complying with council height requirements. But it's a very good report by the council. There's a lot of work for the architects to do with the council and all concerned, and I'm sure that this project, being so significant, is on its way to being a bloody good development at the end of the day. So I hope that the communication between all concerned continues, and this project can reach its potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Grounds? Councillor Sullivan, sorry, Martin, can you just stay at the microphone? Councillor Sullivan has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. You've obviously watched the progress of this development with the different scales that have come forward, and presumably the previous ones from nearly a decade ago. And as someone who owns property directly over the road and most impacted, you've made the comment about overshadowing. How do you put that into the context of, say, the scale of development, the impact of shadowing? What's the most important thing in your perspective in terms of the different things that we have to measure for someone that's living over the road or owns a property over the road facing Coventry Parade, and obviously also in Thompson Road, just in terms of your own personal amenity and those of the people that live in the places that you have an interest in?
Yeah, look, when it was first proposed, the Tower Block 2 was significantly overshadowing the corner of Thompson Road and down Coventry Parade. And in shifting it back 15 metres and lowering it significantly, it's taken that overshadowing away from the corner of Thompson Road and my mum's old house, which is number 4 Coventry Parade. The other Tower Block 1, gives a bit of overshadowing, but I do believe that Coventry Parade is a boulevard in that it has a central medium strip that is well planted, and it's a really good buffer between the brewery site and the buildings on the Coventry Parade southern side of the brewery site, or the north end of Coventry Parade, north end of Thompson Road. To me, the overshadowing is overemphasised. I don't believe it's as important as overshadowing diagrams are done on the summer solstice and the winter solstice, and you don't look at everything in between. And there's an awful lot of sunshine that finds its way through in the in-between parts, and so I think overshadowing is too much. I think that the scale of what happens on that Matilda Bay Brewery site, if it is medium to high density, low rise, is a far worse outcome for North Fremantle than a much more open, much more accessible to the North Fremantle community that is created by these tower blocks. Now, just how high these tower blocks should be, I'm not here to say that I understand how high they should be. But I think the tower block solutions are far better than the medium to high density that was proposed previously. Personally, I like them much better as a resident living on that corner than I prefer the Cox Howlett scheme.
Okay, any further questions?
Just one more. You possibly can't answer this question, but you just mentioned the corner site, which you don't own, so the corner of Coventry Parade and Thompson Road.
I designed it, so I feel like I own it.
Yeah, I know. I was aware that you were the architect for the additions on that. And are you aware, because that person doesn't live in Australia, are you aware if they've...
Yes, no, Nadia, she's a friend, and she lives in America.
Do you know if she's made any comment?
Look, she hasn't made any comment, but that is an old warehouse with very high walls around it, and I put the glass building inside the very high walls. The overshadowing that is now existing with the building set back 15 meters and the lower heights there will not affect Nadia at all. I don't believe Nadia has any particular thinking about the architectural merits of the Matilda Bay site, but she would certainly be concerned about the traffic, which everybody is concerned about. This is something that needs very good study, and in reading the report by the main roads and everybody with respect to the traffic, I was not impressed.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of all the people who are commenting, you are allowed to speak at the JDAP meeting, and they allow 5 minutes, but you have to register ahead of time. The officers can advise you how to do that. And the meeting is on the 15th of November at 9:30 in this room. Okay, so it's 15th of November at 9:30 in this room, but you do need to register if you wish to speak, and you need to provide a précis of what you intend to say.
That is the JDAP meeting, yeah?
That's for the JDAP meeting, yes. You can't just turn up and speak. You can turn up and watch, but if you want to speak, you have to register and provide a summary of what points you wish to make. Okay, thank you. That applies to anybody else who wishes to speak. Jerry McGill. So you have 3 minutes starting now.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm the convener of the North Fremantle Community Association. So I'm looking at this development from a community perspective. So I'm a little less sanguine about it than Martin is as an architect. The respect and inclusion are buzzwords of the age, but the authors of this proposal have yet to hear, much less to heed them. As the officers' report states, under heritage, new development on this site should respect and respond to the built form character of the area and its significant streetscapes. The proposed infill development with a podium base supporting 3 towers, by the way, up to 20 stories, that's almost double the Fremantle Port Authority's 11 stories, with triangular and diamond-shaped floor plans does not respect and complement the established urban form of the area or the character of its surrounding streetscapes. the scale and form of the buildings, their dissociation from the established street grid, and the use of contrasting materials and finishes does not respond sympathetically to the established historic context of the North Fremantle area. Its inclusiveness is similarly lacking. Referring to the report again, this time under urban design, the proposal lacks a connection to place in terms of built form orientation and architectural typologies. The proposal does not speak to the local context or to a gentle evolution of North Fremantle from industrial, worker, residential to something higher density and contemporary. The proposal represents a built form imposed on the finer grain of lots and streets that underpin the urban pattern and character of North Fremantle. I couldn't have said it better myself, Mr. Chairman. And from the Design Advisory Committee, which is not given to damning comments, a distinctive architecture for the design and melding with the proposed adaptive reuse of these significant heritage buildings on the subject site has not been achieved. As such, the proposal is not yet seen to satisfy the objectives of and design principles of SPP 7. That is, design of the built environment, and fails to achieve the required design quality outcomes for a proposal of this significance. Not much longer, Chairman, if you will allow me. And finally, under community benefits, that the applicant should consider ways to demonstrate community benefits that do not rely on commercial offerings. I quote these extracts because they go to the heart of the community's concern about these high-rise developments. They would be fine in Dubai, but they have no place here, nor anywhere else in Fremantle, nor, given the reactions to them in Oslo, Netherlands, and places beyond, anywhere other than perhaps the Perth CBD. If JW approves this application, and in the face of its forensic demolition in this report, we are truly witnessing what I've elsewhere called the death of planning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. McGill, any questions of Mr. McGill? No, thank you. Anne Former? 3 minutes.
I support the officer's recommendation, so I've just got a couple of short comments on a couple of things. We've had some developments like North Bank that range from 1 to 6 stories, and they fit in with the community well. The industrial scale of North Fremantle within the residential area, as shown by the Dingo Flour Mill, would be of a 4-story factory building and a 6-story building with the sign on, and that is the character of North Fremantle as far as I see it. The policy on this site in 2015 was for a maximum 10-story building, and this was a policy which was designed within the council without any consultation with the North Fremantle community. So it came as a surprise to us. And now we have not only 10 stories, but 25 stories. So it's an overwhelming increase, and I don't see how it fits into this community or the Fremantle community at all. Height does make a difference. It gives an alienating sense within the landscape. It does give overshadowing, and it is not the scale of North Fremantle or Fremantle. And we have a large number of other sites in North Fremantle, and this, if it was approved, would set a really destructive and damaging precedent for all of those other sites, which we are yet to deal with. And leading on from that, this level of density leads to the worst impact in North Fremantle, which is the overwhelming traffic in an area which is already overwhelmed by regional traffic. And the impact of that on the entire suburb, all the way down Stirling Highway, will be huge. So these are just a few of what I feel are the problems with excessive height and development. And in terms of the pedestrian environment and landscaping that is proposed here, the concrete podium, which is supposed to be our open space, is not a very inviting way of dealing with internal open space, and I don't see it as a great positive for people using the space. It's inaccessible, a very brash kind of a place for people to be in. So I don't see that the quality of that space is great for the community. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions of the speaker? The next speaker is Jackie Carter. For 3 minutes. Starting now, thank you.
I've only lived here in North Fremantle for a few decades, but over that time I've come to love the skyline and the t-shirts and the tea towels and stuff. I can't see how Glass Mountain is going to add to the overall amenity of North Fremantle in any way, shape, size, whatever. It feels like a 3-story shopping mall with a Florida condominium casino stuck on top. It feels like Observation City in the wrong place. The height is unbelievable, and I feel sorry for the people behind on the riverside whose properties and windows are going to be overlooked, and they're going to have to rearrange their lives. I can't. The disappearing of the flour mill is distressing. And as I stood to come here tonight on the train station, and the shade of the 5-story Freeman Loop development now not only obscures the sunset view but puts you in the shade, I just can't help but imagine what the unthought of consequences are going to be. The height is ridiculous. I love density. I love the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I love the fact that they've stuck to the contours of the landscape, and you can see it. That there is a higher, it goes up to 5 and 6 stories around transport nodes, but there is no transport there. And unless Glass Mountain and its developers are going to put back Leighton Beach train station, I can't see how it's going to work. I feel like it's something that doesn't address the local landscape. It doesn't connect with the beach. It hasn't got anything for the beach. And I'm going to ask that what we do need is a supermarket. We have no supermarket in our area. East Fremantle Foodworks has just closed down. The owner didn't renew the lease in a way that was compatible for the owners. And we have no GP and we have no cash point. I have to go to Coles Liquorland to get out and buy $10 worth of liquor to get cash out. We don't need a casino. We don't need a high-rise glass edifice sticking out of North Fremantle. We need more community and transport options. And 3 stories on Coventry Parade is not amenable to walking back from the beach and popping in for a cup of tea or a coffee. And that would be something that maybe the local population could enjoy. I don't know what else you can do except to say that poor old Mr. Jeff Howlett, who designed the concert hall and council house, might turn in his grave at the prospect of this Glass Mountain. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? Gentleman in the blue shirt, did you indicated you want to speak? No, so we don't allow you to ask questions of people making presentations. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so there are no representatives of the applicants here. They're saving themselves for Jada. So we'll move into committee. I will move the officer's recommendation, which is for refusal. I think there are 10 grounds for refusal. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lorva. There is a minor amendment from Councillor Lang. Would you like to move that now and ask for a seconder? So, would you like to move your? So, I'll let you introduce the amendment first and then ask for a seconder.
Very minor amendments just occurred to me. Reading the reports and understanding the history of the site, I catch myself and I catch a lot of members of the community Even our documentation constantly referring to this site as the Matilda Bay Brewery site, when in fact it's the former Ford Motor Company building site. And I think that just wanted to note that in our documentation that where possible to pay respect to the heritage of the site, we should, as a council, perhaps refer to the site as a former Ford Motor Company site where practical.
So you're moving that? No, I'm happy to second that. I will just note that the initial investigation of this site by the Heritage Council, which began and never finished, because at the time it started, the minister would not progress heritage listings if the owner didn't agree, which is the reason we've been given by the Heritage Council. They actually listed it as the Ford Motor Company, not as the Matilda Bay Brewery, even though it's already ceased to be the Matilda Bay Brewery. So I do agree with you. And the history of the Ford factory is a much more important component of the social history of North Fremantle and Western Australia than is, although very successful and a very good brewery, the Matilda Bay Brewery, which is no longer in Western Australia. So I'll have to second that. Is there any discussion? Okay, I'll move to a vote. This is on the amendment. That's unanimous. Thank you. So back to motion. Anybody wish to speak? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, and I appreciate that most of my colleagues probably will be supporting the officer's recommendation. I'm speaking not obviously seeking an approval, but I think my opinions really ought to be put onto the record because one, I'm a JDAP member, but also in a sense, whatever happens tonight, this is a really, really important site, and we need to take stock of how it should and could be developed, and perhaps what obstacles there might be for it not being developed and having not been developed for quite some considerable time now. My starting point on a lot of these sort of issues is always that there is going to be change. We can have a view about a place that we live that perhaps we've lived for 40 or 50 years, and perhaps Europeans have lived for 200 years nearly. And we can have a view about what that place might have been like before that as well. These are all very relevant perspectives to us and to cultures that might have had that longer view as well. But change is also a part of our society, and I think that's an important element. And we have striven to seek change in that area because this council has had for a very long time the view that urban sprawl can't continue to happen, and that we do need to proactively go out of our way to encourage infill development as part of a progressive council, and hopefully leading the way for other places in Perth. And to that extent, this area, not just this site, but that area is zoned for considerable uplift. And I would make the point that its density uplift is 3 times the uplift that the North Bank site, which I worked on, was zoned for. That was R60. This is R160 is my comprehension. So it has that potential for significantly more development. That's what it's been zoned for. So we can't make these comparisons to a site which I think did do the right thing at North Bank because it was on the foreshore, because it was so interconnected to the very important parts of North Fremantle. The McCabe Street precinct is on the edge. Buckland Hill wasn't there 30 years ago in terms of development. This was the very, very northern edge of North Fremantle, and Mosman Park started merging closer towards it, and North Fremantle virtually only just touches it. It was largely an industrial area. It wasn't the residential area. So it is subject to massive change. Look, for me, when I look at this proposal without looking at the report, what I see is something that is very, very likeable, very much in terms of what I've seen in other developments in that area. This is the best one in terms of its balance and its provision of open space and its context in terms of the heritage buildings and the like. It's also quite a difficult site to redevelop. So we have these planning policies which we then try and measure this against, which I think are certainly well-intentioned. And I've been involved in policies that have asked for sight lines and view corridors and the like to be created, including at Leighton Beach. And they have largely not achieved what the community actually set out to try and achieve. They haven't created the sort of view corridors that are the sorts of things that you would sit there and go, oh, wow, wasn't that really clever of the planners to actually leave that tiny, minuscule slot in the buildings to be able to view through, that then someone coming along and planted some Norfolk Island pines in anyway, and you lost the view corridor, because that's exactly what's happened at Leighton Beach. So they are well-intentioned, but I don't think, in hindsight, that the view corridor assessments that we've got for this broader area are really all that meaningful. So I tend to take the view that they realistically should be set aside. And I think what happened in 2015 was much more about whether or not the community liked high rise or development over a certain number of stories than it was about view corridors. Now that may well still be a valid argument. So don't get me wrong. I know the community or parts of the community that come along and express their view at council do not want to see high-rise development, and I imagine they define that as something is. So I get that, but I also get that, and I always have on this site, that if you have R160 development and you only have it to 5 or 6 stories, what you will get is this massive, blocky, edge-to-edge development that has very little on offer in terms of quality spatial elements within it. And I've always taken the view that that is much better to trade that off and have, and I've said it before, one high building is, if that achieves quality open space, quality environments around the buildings for the people that are living there, the 200 families and residents that are going to be living there, but also contributes to the community's enjoyment through that space, then that's a great outcome. Now, I accept that I'm probably alone on that. In terms of a number of issues that are sort of raised in the report, things like plot ratio. I mean, we talk about how to measure the development. I know some of my colleagues have said, well, couldn't they just reduce the unit size, a fraction? Well, the reality is, we measured density and intensity by plot ratio. And yes, this is 10% over. The 10% over in plot ratio is something that this council has approved many times before, but it does have to be approved with a good eye on what it is that it's achieving. What are the benefits that a development is actually achieving that warrant giving a relaxation to something like that? And that's, the report does measure those, and it does identify that in some areas, yes, they're achieving some good outcomes, but it also identifies that, I think there's about a list of about 8, that there's also a bunch of areas where they're not actually achieving that, and that includes affordable housing. It includes, check my notes, so they are achieving it in terms of the heritage, but there's things like the water conservation and efficiency, the public facilities, where you can sort of take that either way as to what that actually means. But certainly the affordable and diverse aspect is an area where you could argue that the developer could actually contribute a lot more. A lot of the things that are perhaps wrong with the development, if I can describe them that way, are the things that are only actually going to be achievable in stage 2 anyway. And so what I find difficult in terms of dealing with this application is that they're not being shown the things that I think are important. And we're not seeing from the developer the conversations about how to contribute to fixing the sort of problems that we know exist in that area. I wanted to spend just a fraction of the time on that. The issue of the roads, the issue of the impacts that not just this development, but all of the developments that are in that area are going to make, and whether or not we as a council and as a city are making that area development ready. Because I think if we're going to put in place a zoning that says you can have this many dwellings, we might argue as to whether it should be short, fat, and dumpy, or tall and skinny and elegant, but it's zoned to have this many dwellings, then it's also a reasonable onus on us to make sure to be proactive in making the area development ready. And that includes getting the roads right, because you can't zone an area and say, well, you know, which is what says in the report. You can't zone an area and say, oh, but we're going to refuse every development that comes along because you're providing too many houses, which is going to increase the number of cars, and that's going to have an impact on the local amenity and on Stirling Highway, and therefore we're going to refuse the application. And that is one of the grounds. So we can't sit here and keep doing that. We do need to proactively resolve what's going to happen in Coventry Parade, and particularly what's needs to happen in McCabe Street to accommodate this, not to push it away, but to actually make it development ready. And you know, I get that we can't fix the Stirling Highway traffic lights without state government involvement, but everything from McCabe Place, Eastwoods, we should be very proactively working with the town of Mosman Park to try and sort out what needs to physically happen in those areas to accommodate this style of development. And if we can't come up with a solution, we shouldn't have rezoned the areas for high density in the first place. And that's the reality, because we're, you know, it's unfair on everyone if you sort of approach it that way. I also wanted to just touch on the heritage, and this is a really hard one for me because it, you know, I was one of the protagonists, I guess, for the previous owner, basically saying, yes, you needed to keep the sawtooth roof and you needed to keep as much of the original factory element running down Coventry Parade and the like. And I have to say, he's not in the room, we did that in part, or certainly I did that in part, because I was very concerned about the sorts of development proposals that were on offer back then. So in a sense, a part of me was using the conservation of the warehouse building as a way of making sure that whatever the development occurred didn't have a really awful impact on the heritage of the building when you viewed it from the public environment, Stirling Highway primarily. So then a developer comes along with a proposal that flips that and actually provides a very high quality type of integration between new and old. But not only does that, introduces uses that are long-term sustainable uses of that building that would otherwise be actually really difficult to, you know, you're not going to fill it with residential. So you actually, if you're going to fill it with some sort of commercial, long-term sustainable use, it needs to actually work. It needs to be something that delivers that next 100 years for that building. And that's what this developer has done. And they've done it in a way which, you know, wouldn't have occurred to me, and it probably wouldn't have occurred to anyone when we wrote the policies for that site. They've done it in a way that actually integrates really well the new residential components with the commercial components. And it brings people in at that upper level. You know, the Ford factory building is a 2-story building and the like, and it brings them right in at that level. Now, it took me a while to go, is that the right thing to be doing? But the reality is it's going to produce a lot of benefit in terms of the conservation of that. And if it came down to doing nothing to those buildings for the next 50 years or 30 years, and I could quite contemplate that happening, if it came down to that, or to making some degree of compromise in terms of the heritage, I think I would take the latter. I'd take the bird in the hand on this one, because it's a building sitting on Stirling Highway that's 1 story high for most of it. What else is going to go in there that's going to conserve it in a really meaningful way that the public will actually get to enjoy? So there's a part of me that definitely goes, look, that would be a part of me that wouldn't be the roadblock to approving the development. It's not ideal, but it's certainly doable and achievable, and what's in front of us right now. Having said all that, there are still plenty of problems with this proposal. So I'm not going to try and talk you out of a refusal. And I'd very much doubt whether JDAP will get talked out of a refusal either, for that matter, because the report is pretty damning of the non-compliance. It's not necessarily damning of the proposal, it's damning of the non-compliance. And I have to ask myself, in many ways, is that problem the problem of the proposal or the problem of the expectation that's in the policy? And for me, it's falls over the line of the problem of the expectation, because if we're not prepared to look at something like this, then what the hell are we prepared to look at that isn't actually going to be even more detrimental to the community, even though it might seemingly tick a few boxes in terms of height, the dreaded height. So if this is something that is capable of approval, then it would need to do a bunch of things, which would include, contribution to the to some agreements about how to fix the roads in the area, connectivity of the roads and the open space. Particularly, you can't expect connectivity from North Fremantle to the McCabe Street to be only through an undercroft road. We're going to need to see significantly improved consultation in that regard. We're also going to need to see open space connectivity between North Fremantle and Mosman Park. That is going to be the thing that would make a massive difference in terms of how all of the people in the McCabe Street precinct actually live their lives. And it shouldn't be all about cars, but it certainly should be about the lifestyle, because then the connectivity of living in that environment and getting to the beach, getting to the open spaces, getting to the foreshore, getting down to the North Fremantle Town Centre, and then getting back to where the shops are, which are in Mosman Park, because that's where they are. That's the community you live in when you live in that environment. It doesn't stop at a boundary; it stops where your zone of influence is, and that goes a bit further on. So we are going to need to see what that actually entails. It's no good saying, "Oh, it's just a blank canvas at stage 2." The things that might get them closer to allowing us to consider the taller building are the design issues that the DAC have noted. Although I would say the DAC put a lot of emphasis on sustainability of the building, saying, well, it can't possibly be sustainable because it's a glass box, and yet they've achieved a 5-star rating. So there's a bit of me that's sort of questioning, is it just the thought of it being a glass box that is the problem, or is it the actuality of its sustainability, which is reaching 1 star higher than they need to with the 5-star rating? But I do get that perhaps there are improvements that could be made in terms of the building, and I also get that perhaps the building closest to Coventry Parade needs to be nuanced a little bit more in terms of its interconnectivity to the street and to the rest of North Fremantle, so it at least transitions a little bit. I think there's also a possibility that we're trying to make all of the transitioning between this development zone and the rest of North Fremantle on this very thin line called Coventry Parade. And when you look at Coventry Parade, you can see that all but 2 of the buildings on the other side are not residential. So there is an opportunity for us to actually go back and look at our own planning and say, is Coventry Parade part of the opportunity of success in this area rather than an opportunity lost? So my sense is that area is probably part of the buffer zone and should be one of the steps up towards this redevelopment area. The other things that could be considered are, the improved public facilities, water conservation, and the like. I touched on those before. So I did want to put all those things down. I'm sorry the developers are not here because, well, they are. So yeah, so I wasn't absolutely sure, but for me, they're the things that actually need to be worked on, and I want to see this development approved, but I'm not sure JDAP's going to do that, and I'm pretty confident the council's not going to do that tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Groom.
I share some of Councillor Sullivan's sentiment, and certainly in looking at this proposal, since we were first introduced to the site and the ideas, and with the report that's come, I don't understand how we zoned a site R160, potentially 700 dwellings, and didn't know we'd be having this conversation. So, this is a conversation that's been coming since that rezoning was done. I'm certainly firmly of the view that to rezone it and not address the traffic issues in the area is an oversight at best. And whilst it's probably the reason why this can't be supported right now, it is something that has to be sorted out jointly between us and the state government and the proponent. It's not, no one's going to be able to fix the road network and the traffic loads from this site independently of that cooperation. So that's, it may well be a reason why we can't support it tonight, but it's a reason that's got to be resolved and can't be a blockage to the site. I'm not expert enough to comment, I'm afraid, on the heritage things. I think the adaptive reuse of the building that's proposed is probably heading in the right direction. Whether that needs to be revisited a bit, but I certainly think it will be a real asset for the North Fremantle area. I do note the pressing needs of the community that we've heard several times over many years for the more day-to-day activities such as supermarkets and so forth, and hopeful that maybe that can be accommodated in due course on this site. I guess where I've kind of come unstuck, the first proposal was a tower of 16 odd stories as the tallest tower, and that was probably more closer to what might have been expected or allowed, and that I could kind of make sense of that. And I certainly am in the school of thought that 6 to 8 stories of just non-stop development on that site without gaps and view corridors would be a horrendous outcome. So how do we get close to the density but still maintain the social license around height? So where it's got to now, which is a compromise for other parts of the site, I haven't got to a point that I could support that height. The other thing I'm really struggling with in the design is that these houses are big houses. They're not units as we might think for medium density. They're really large floor plate, sort of 300 square metres, 120, 140 square metres for sort of 2-bedroom units. They are houses in the air. And always our intention when we're moving into that medium density space is to get more diversity on a site. I'm not expecting that this site's going to deliver, really what we might consider affordable housing in terms of can be afforded by the kind of lower 30 percentile of our community, but certainly more diversity, more choice, meeting more of that need. And as soon as some of those areas start to come down, then the overall demand on the site in terms of height and footprint and plot ratio, we get more elasticity there. So, it's clear to me that there is opportunity to move and still achieve some yield on the site. And when I look at what's possible and what's actually being achieved and what's left of the site, I do wonder, as with my colleague, what might be coming, and that's a concern as well in terms of these what's being achieved out of these large towers. So I do think this isn't the end of it. We will see this again, and I would like to see something approved that delivers some of the benefits of this proposal, but I won't be able to support it tonight as it stands.
Murphy's Harding.
I'm just taking the opportunity to speak now because I can neatly say that Councillor Groom has pretty much summed up my thoughts on this. I just wanted to add one thing, which is that whatever happens with this current proposal, the conversation with Main Roads is going to take a while to prosecute. So I guess my plea to the community, to the developers of the other adjacent sites is we need to all stay together in that conversation, because as custodians of this place, this is going to be an ongoing challenge. And if we have to keep kind of being concerned about proposals in the area because we haven't resolved that issue, it's just a really disappointing outcome. I think the government, in my dealings with them, I think precipitated a bit by this conversation, but also with the knowledge that not far down the pipeline, there's another proposal very close by. They're listening. So we've got to jump on that, and we've got to come to them with a solution that shows that, yes, we have zoned it in a way where we want to get some density into the area, but the roads have to function before we get to that point. Otherwise, we'll just keep being in a somewhat circular conversation.
Councillor Groom, your microphone's on. Councillor Graham.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, yeah, there's a lot to like about this development. First of all, I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation tonight, but I don't have a great problem with height in this area. Height's a very subjective thing. 20 stories, 16, 13. I mean, get a dartboard out and see what you hit. But I do think if they can get it right with the height, I'd be quite happy with this. This site, and also 140 Stirling Highway, which is on the other side of McCabe Street and actually in the city of Fremantle, they are our mostly two areas that we can develop to a high density that is going to actually fit, in my view anyway, into the surrounding areas. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or whatever the saying is. It'd be great if the applicants could work to something where they can, I don't know, it's a very complex application for a Joe Blow like me to try and tell you guys what to do. But, you know, keep at it, keep working at it. Traffic issues will never go away, even in little old streets in the back of Beaconsfield. There's traffic issues with every development. So I'm sure the authorities will sort that out as well, as long as you work with them. But yes, as I said, there's a lot to like about this. Councillor Sullivan articulated a lot of the good points, and I concur with those. And I wish you all well in the future.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks. I like the broader concept of the development you put forward, but it's some of the finer details that have been discussed tonight that I'm struggling with. And what I wanted to reiterate with the group here was I hope we could keep this conversation going around finding a solution that works for your group and also for our community as well. On the heritage side of things, I touched on the Ford Motor Company, and that's what struck me as well, looking through the designs here. Is there an opportunity somewhere to pay more homage to the site as a car building factory rather than the brewery? Everything throughout the building to me pays homage to the brewery aspect, but we're losing the important heritage of the car building history. And through the report, the buildings that we have in North Fremantle are similar or identical to similar sites in San Francisco and Geelong, which is stunning public buildings now. So you've got a real asset there that we really want to highlight so everyone in Fremantle can use this site. In terms of conversations around traffic, we have to accept that there's going to be more density built in this part of North Fremantle. And I hope if we are having a conversation with Main Roads, I hope in parallel we can have conversations with Department of Transport as well, because this encourages a conversation around the McCabe Street train station. Does that exist? Or what are the public transport options can we look at here? Not just falling back and relying on cars. So that's something I think positive could come from this, is density done right in this area and increased population. Does that mean we can have a train station, the McCabe Street train station? Other than that, yeah, just wanted to hope that we could keep positive conversations going with your group to try and find a solution that works.
Councillor Lorber.
Thank you. And I just want to echo the comments from my colleagues up here tonight. It's I feel like this proposal is getting close, but it's probably not quite there yet with some of the level of details. When we did a walkthrough of this site, it was really impressive, and I think having a good offering in that location is really what we need. But what struck me about this the whole way through is just having no idea about what stage 2 looks like. So if there was any way to even get a concept or something forward about how this piece is going to fit together with the next piece, I think that will go a long ways to also alleviating some of the reservations that I may have at this moment. But I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation tonight.
Any further comments? Well, I'll just have a few comments to make. I'll just say that in 2015 there was a consultation process about the upzoning of this site, and there wasn't a great deal of support. I imagine there would have been support for something around about R80 on this site, and given all the constraints of the site, that would probably been a lot more appropriate. For some reason, the council of the day pushed that much higher without any conditions on the need to resolve the traffic, the reinstatement of the railway station, the connections to the beach, the problems on McCabe Street. And then under that scheme, which wasn't supported by the community, I think it's fair to say, the height limit was at 11 stories with the view corridors. The first proposal to come in from this applicant was, I think, 16 stories. And then, in order to increase the setbacks, they went to 20 stories, which is not 20 stories above street level, it's 20 stories above podium level. So it's a very significant building. I've not heard any member of this committee think it would be a good idea to have a 26-story building anywhere near where they live. I've never heard anyone suggest it. The highest zoning I'm aware of in South Fremantle is 5 stories on the Sea Lane site, which would be a perfect site for a high-rise building, I would imagine. It's got roads on 3 sides, and it's on the beach. It's close to amenities. It's on a bus route, and so on. So I'm always a bit puzzled why the high density is always fine in North Fremantle, but a bit slow to get moving anywhere else. Already got the highest density in Fremantle by a mile. Or Lake Bank, this site, the One Steel site, and the Tasker buildings. There are no buildings similar to that anywhere else in Fremantle. And so to suggest people are opposed to change, I think is a very erroneous statement. I mean, there's if people are opposed to change, they wouldn't live in North Fremantle because they wouldn't ever go out of the house, I don't think. So to suggest that this is a kind of NIMBY resistance to change when people have already accepted an 11-story proposal and would have probably judged this against that 11-story proposal had it come through that way. The council there, I believe, was very remiss in not making it contingent. I mean, once you upscale the zoning of a place, you increase its value. If you do that and somebody buys it at that value, they expect to develop it. But if they can't get the road sorted out, the trains and so on sorted out, it then comes back to this council to refuse it. We've had no help from the state government over 10 years to try and resolve these issues. To me, it should be all tied in with the alignment of Curtin Avenue, the connections to the beach. There's a real opportunity there to have some fabulous railway station, you know, across Stirling Highway onto an elevated platform with facilities on it, go down into a railway station, continue across to the beach. You know, there's with state government support and cooperation, there is something really fabulous is possible there. But whilst ever we try to deal with these individual sites surrounded by congested roads, no pedestrian crossings even across the road, a bridge that's condemned, by the way, the pedestrian bridge is condemned and a new one is designed, but there are no funds to build it. So to me, it was very remiss of the council of the day to do the upzoning. We're now left to deal with those issues. I do support the office recommendation. I'm a little bit puzzled by people saying the heritage is okay because the Heritage Council's comments are that far too much of the building has been put up for demolition and that a perfectly good development could happen with the retention of much more of the heritage fabric. So I'm not quite sure how that gets to tick. Anyway, I move the office recommendation, and if there's no further comments, no, we'll vote. All those in favour of the office recommendation? Those against? Councillor Sullivan against. Just wait for a minute if people want to leave. The next item is also a JDAP item. It's a deferred item. Amherst Street. Got 3 people wishing to speak. Jenny Officer. So you have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. My name's Jenny Officer. I'm a resident of White Gum Valley. I've recently served 4 years on the City of Fremantle's Design Advisory Committee, and I'm a current member of the State Design Review Panel. I'm speaking against the officer's recommendation tonight. I fully support the comments that you made in September at this committee meeting. The minor amendments made to the proposal since then don't adequately address any of its substantial shortcomings. So in 2017, I think this council adopted the Knutsford Street East Local Structure Plan to guide the transition of this post-industrial area into an exemplary mixed-use and residential area. And the plans for this large portion of the site I don't think meet exemplary development. At the scale of the locality, the suburb, the public realm, the community, and right down to the houses themselves, this development offers little amenity. And I'd ask you to consider that we're in a housing crisis, a climate crisis, and still a global pandemic. We should really be asking how housing can assist us in helping to respond to environmental change, how housing can provide pleasant spaces where we all work from home more and spend more time in them, how it can help make resilient communities and provide pleasant interactions between neighbours. And good medium density design, I think, is characterised by really good interrelationships of people, streets and landscape, and all undone quite poorly here. So you've got the information in front of you. All the submissions advertised objected to the proposal. It's non-compliant for open space because of reduced setbacks and excessive bulk. These are really big houses on small lots, all with 2-car lock-up garages. This is at the expense of landscape and streetscape, of deep soil zones, of sunlight, of ventilation, of privacy, of aspect, of biodiversity and communal areas. I think outsourcing internal landscape requirements to the verge is not a good outcome. The verge in this case is also not good public realm because it's full of crossovers. There's no relationship between the street and the house. There's also no diversity offered. We can't expect other developments in this area to do the heavy lifting. Providing a variety of housing typologies is an objective of that structure plan, and townhouses stuffed with bedrooms don't offer this. So consider for a moment living in a type F, this is just one example, where the living area of this 4-bedroom house is smaller than any one of the bedrooms. There's no garden area wider than 1.3 metres, you cannot plant a tree. Every courtyard and external space in the whole development is overshadowed on the 21st of June. Every internal road is fronted by blank garage doors. The pedestrian experience inside the site will not only be unsafe, it's actively discouraged by the design. There's no house types where there's a bedroom and a living area together on ground for accessibility and ageing in place. There's no consideration of water-sensitive urban design within the site boundaries. There's very little permeable surface on the site. Allowing for future installation of lifts and PV cells by individual owners, I don't think represents exemplary design for universal access or sustainability. The houses have lots of unshaded glazing, they'll be reliant on air conditioning, and remember this is a fully gated development. This is not the outcome for White Gum Valley, our suburb or Fremantle and our community. There are also no communal spaces. And the changes made to that design, you know about all of those things already, are ineffective to address what are major issues. It's been done as a kind of a measuring exercise, not a redesign of usable, amenable spaces. So I urge the committee to support Councillor Groom's alternative recommendation for refusal. I hope the City of Fremantle doesn't intend to meet its infill targets through this type of development. This will leave a really poor legacy for our suburb, and I'm concerned it'll set a really poor precedent for context and character in the future. And if the approved lot layout can't support an intelligent design response for built form, because that is one of the problems here, then the lot layout really needs to change. The sort of minor adjustments we've seen here can't make the improvements that are required. So this is the time to do it, I think, while it's still on paper, before it gets built and is there for a really long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the Speaker? Councillor Groom.
Maybe.
Just again, for the benefit of all the speakers, this is a JDAP item. We don't have a date for it yet. It might be added on to the existing date, which is the 15th, but at this stage it hasn't been. You can we don't have a date? No. And contact the officers. You are able to speak, but you must register ahead of time. Nick Thews, is that the right pronunciation?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicholas Toast. I'm a local of Fremantle, and I would like to present a statement against the officer's recommendation for this development and acknowledge that I support the previous comments by the committee. I feel these have been inadequately addressed in subsequent amendments. As a young graduate of architecture, I hold serious concerns over the precedent that this development may set over the built form and context of the wider Fremantle area. The development demonstrates little engagement with its surrounding context and presents a dire streetscape to the main Amherst Street frontage, specifically in relation to the overwhelming dominance of car-centric infrastructure, which is completely at odds with the surrounding context. Such an unfriendly and potentially dangerous streetscape should be avoided at all costs. Being in close proximity to other high-quality developments that have demonstrated and have been widely recognised as quality medium-density developments, this proposal presents a stark contrast, seemingly devoid of any dwelling diversity and presenting as pseudo-townhouses, which are in fact typical large family homes shoehorned into tiny envelopes under the pretense of delivering density. The provision of high-quality, adaptable dwellings supporting a diversity of occupations and levels of immediate accessibility should be imperative, something that is in no way provided by this proposal. Equally as dangerous is the assertion that sustainability can be achieved simply through the potential for solar cells to be installed by owners. The overall planning of the development demonstrates poor dwelling orientation, failing to orient towards north and offer even basic levels of natural light and ventilation. Even forgiving this orientation, the poor permeability across the development establishes a situation where there is minimal access to natural direct sunlight or ventilation. This should be a basic consideration, especially in the context of global pandemics. Asserting that this can be achieved through tiny internalized courtyards which will only receive direct sunlight at midday for a few hours at best. Although these situations may be acceptable under the codes, this in no way represents good practice. Surely we should be aiming well above minimal acceptable conditions. I can only assume the overall orientation and planning of the development is as a result of predetermined lot subdivision. If so, I urge all involved to reconsider this now, while the project exists only as drawings and a proposal. I would like to urge the committee to support Councillor Groom's alternative recommendation for refusal, as I believe this development represents a dangerous precedent for the future built form, amenity and quality of Fremantle as a place to live, the effects of which I, along with countless other young constituents, will be experiencing directly for the rest of our lives.
Any questions? Thank you. Just for your information, the applicants put in a subdivision application prior to putting in this application, and that has been approved. So the subdivision was specifically designed for this particular development application. Dimity Walker.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Dimity Walker. As you know, I am a local resident and I'm an architect of Space Agency Architects. I'm here in both those capacities to basically concur with the assessment of the committee that the proposal fails in every possible way to respond appropriately to the structure plan for the site. And I would reiterate what both previous speakers have said in support of that. I think that the attempt to snooker the approving authorities by submitting a subdivision plan that is not able to deliver a desired outcome seems to exploit some sort of loophole in the system. It is very disappointing to see such regressive built form lower the standard set by more ambitious projects in the area that demonstrate much more successful and forward-thinking planning and built form alternatives. Particularly poor are the 10-metre long driveways and elevations of garage doors to Amherst Street. I would urge the committee to uphold its position that this development should not be recommended for approval to JDAP. If it were at all possible, the proponents should be compelled to revise the subdivision plan so that the built form scheme that responds to the objections of the structure plan can be achieved. As it stands, Monument East is a wolf in sheep's clothing that basically seeks to profit from the good work of those involved in genuine placemaking within this precinct and within Fremantle more broadly.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Just before moving any recommendation, I will, for the benefit of the committee, I did check with officers today. The fact that the subdivision is approved doesn't constrain us in any way in our decision making. We can assess the DA completely independently of the fact that there is already a subdivision approval. We don't need to approve anything simply because there's a subdivision. I'm not planning to, with support from the committee, I'm not planning to move the officer's recommendation, but the officers have put together the amendment from Councillor Groom and the amendment from Councillor Sullivan into one fairly large recommendation, which we'll get on the screen in a minute. It was circulated, I think, to everybody. Was it the very latest version? There have been several versions. The latest version has two parts, numbered 1 and 2. 1 is Councillor Groom's and 2 is Councillor Sullivan's. It's coming up. You've seen them in various forms. This is just the latest. There's nothing new here. It's just that it's been put together. There's no new material, but they've been made into one. That's basically. So it's on the screen. I'll just pause for a minute before. So there's no objection to moving that together as the substantive motion. Okay, I'll do that then. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Would you like to speak first to your part of it? So basically, it's just as background. The first part of it is reiterating our refusal. The second part of it is often on JDAP, they ask for an approval to be written in case they have a mind to approve it. So the second part of it is conditions that we would like to see included and changes we'd like to see included if they should choose to approve it. So it's not that we are supporting approval, but we are putting in conditions we'd like to see attached if it should be approved. So I'll ask Councillor Groom to speak to part 1. We'll move the whole thing and speak to part 1 or 2 if you like.
Thank you. And thank you to our speakers who I think have said everything that needs to be said. We'll talk a little bit to the way this has been handled with the separate subdivision and DA, and I'm certainly of the view that we should be writing to the Western Australian Planning Commission and kind of protesting the way that that's unfolded. It's certainly, there was a planning reform process not so long ago that said planning should be strategically led. The design community argued it should be design-led. This process hasn't been either. It's been neither strategic or design outcome. And the idea that a 52-lot subdivision can be approved by a basic set of rules and lines on paper on such a complex site without thinking of any of the greater outcomes and any of the underlying strategic planning just defies belief. So certainly kind of really showing up the flaws in our planning system. Apart from that, I spoke at length of this proposal last time. It's completely inconsistent with our strategic planning. It's inconsistent with the direction that planning's going generally in Western Australia. The recent kind of amendments to the medium density design codes that are flagged but not in place are specifically trying to prevent this kind of development happening. And it just brings none of the amenity that we're looking for in Fremantle. It's certainly not what we want to see more of. And every planning committee meeting, I'm confronted with officer reports that tell me I should approve something because something up the street exists like that. And, whilst apparently precedent doesn't matter, it clearly does. And we have to stand really firm on this as being not a contemporary outcome in any context, and certainly not the right outcome in the Knutsford strategic planning area. So I'm not going to go over the ground we've discussed before or that we've heard in the room today, but I'm really pleased to move this amendment that gives a really clear message of why it's not good enough for our community and for this area, and a whole set of reasons of how it doesn't meet the strategic outcomes for the area.
Thank you. I'll just point out the amendment on the screen looks fairly messy. It will be then redrafted and incorporated into the officer's recommendation to become the recommendation to JDAP if it's passed by the committee. So it won't look like this. It will be edited and tidied up, and it will become. And bear in mind now that the council committee's recommendation to JDAP is the primary one that they see first, which is a change of procedure from the last 2 months. Councillor Sullivan, do you wish to speak to your?
Can I just ask a question? Yep. Just confirming. So we've got a detailed statement of reasons for the change, which is that whole list that runs against the strategic plan that I put together last time. That goes forward still?
Yeah,
great.
That's all part of it. Yep. Councillor Sullivan, do your part?
Thank you. I will, and I firstly thank Councillor Groom for her contribution. In essence, it's exactly what I would want to say as well. I also took the view that JDAP was not so much wavering, but there is a potential, I think, that JDAP will feel compelled or at least hamstrung a little bit to have some sort of an approval. And so I thought that whilst my view is that development is a dog, and it's not just a dog, it's a shaved dog, that maybe we could at least put the fur back on it by fixing some of the absolutely inherent shortfalls in the development proposal. And that includes the way in which they were proposing multiple crossovers in Amherst Street, the way in which their landscape design, even though they went and employed a consultant that they thought would make us go ooh-ah, their tree canopy proposal inside the development was significantly lacking, even though they talk about it as being a family place inside. They hadn't attended to matters like lighting safety, pedestrian integration in a shared street environment, and all of the sorts of things that you might expect if it was genuinely a family-friendly environment that you would want to include in your development so that kids could play in the laneways rather than feel like they were invading into the car-dominated realm of the overly hot internal roads that they were creating without a skerrick of a tree, or maybe a tree that was 1 metre high. So there are a number of things that needed, at the very, very least, to be changed in any form of approval. And so that's what I knew Councillor Groom would do us proud with her part of the motion. So I worked on the bits that would at least create some mitigation. And the first part of that's the one on the screen, which really, and there's a series of footnotes that go with this, or advice notes that actually put this in more detail as to what should happen. But effectively, it's quadrupling, I think, the number of trees that they have shown in their landscape plan for the public realm, where it almost achieves 42 medium-sized trees in the private streets. But it also talks to, well, some of those laneways you can't achieve a canopy cover. They're 6 metres wide or 6.6 metres wide or whatever. That doesn't mean you can't put a pergola over parts of it. Doesn't mean you can't put vertical vegetation in it. Doesn't mean that you can't soften the way the buildings are so that you can compensate for an otherwise incredibly harsh environment. So it's trying to put those elements in there. It also took out the word synthetic grass. I'm not sure how that's still in there. Even the JDAP members went, are you serious, City of Fremantle? I think that's misinterpreted. I mean, it's in there probably to say don't put any synthetic grass in there, but everyone was reading it as saying, oh, yeah, let's put the synthetic grass in the courtyards that almost have no landscaping as it is. This clause also recognises that despite what the developers are saying, that, oh, yeah, every tree will have a courtyard, and the previous developments that we've done, just like these, cookie cutters, all had trees in, and all the owners kept the trees in. This is a 2-storey thin courtyard slot to the open sky short of actually being able to grow a tree in the 1.3 metre maximum landscape zone that they've shown in those areas, it's going to grow really tall and thin and not really do what it is that you want it to do anyway. So this recommendation saying, well, that's just not going to work. We need to see canopy cover in the streets. And I would say that, you know, in some ways this application is in two parts. One part is there's a subdivision without any planning approval for what actually occurs in the private roads. So irrespective of the actual lots that are created, we have a subdivision that has no detail about what should be put into the private roads. And I just find that just bizarre that we do that second, not first. But that's the planning system that the state seems to impose on us. And I would say publicly, even the JDAP members were gobsmacked that somehow the developer had put the pressure onto the planning commission to release the subdivision approval on the Friday immediately before JDAP were to consider the matter on the Monday from memory. It was bizarre. That's it. The next part of the recommendation was trying to just strengthen the conversation. Let me just catch up so if we can actually, I'll speak to the screen. So as I said, the public realm, there is a need for a lighting plan. I just wanted to emphasize what the lighting plan was actually for. And that is if you're going to have pedestrians and cars and everything else all sharing a street environment, there is actually going to be a need for a fairly high level lighting plan to make sure that that area is safe. You know, we just went through design week week before last, where the emphasis was on public safety, particularly for females in these sorts of environments where, you know, there are a number of dead ends. There are a number of gates everywhere. You know, you sort of like feel like you're locked into those spaces. So the SEPTED requirements for those sort of spaces need to be really well considered, and lighting is a part of that. So I wanted to make sure that was made clear, so that if it does come back, our officers have a very clear set of guidelines or instructions as to what sort of level or standard and the purpose of that that we would be seeking from them. The next one down, so not too far, keep going. So there is a requirement in the for the area that there would be buildings that are readily adaptable and can be used as any type of activity, whether it be commercial or arts or, you know, a sort of an artist residence or the like. And that requirement came with a condition that basically said we needed adaptable spaces with very high floor-to-floor heights. A 4-metre ceiling height was what was written in there. And at the very least, we should be trying to achieve that on Stack Street, where we already had that type of precinct fully emerged further up the road. So that is in there to try and at least deal with that. That's the 3 dwellings. It's only been proposed over 2 of them, but the 3 buildings that had the most chance to be adaptable type dwellings in that precinct. So it's trying to achieve that. The next clause was the hard landscaping plan. So this is again picking up on that that whole public realm, if you like, inside the private roads. And the purpose for that is again to make sure that there is a clear understanding that this space is not just about getting through the gated community, the gates of the gated community, and getting your car into the garage, and then never participating at all in the private road environment. That has to be designed and built and maintained in a way that provides these sorts of environments that they're actually describing that they want to achieve. But there is no evidence on the drawings that that's actually what they're proposing. So this tries to deal with that. And it also deals with, you know, it's a little bit of a torturous environment in those private roads. And it's not particularly obvious, but there is a 2.5 metre, I think it is, retaining wall in one spot that separates laneway A from laneway B. So if you happen to be sort of wandering, trying to find, your friend's house, and you get into these dead end laneways, they're really disconcerting, and it means you'll probably walk around the development about 3 or 4 times before you actually find the place you want to go to. I know that, and I'm sure my colleagues know that, because we've all door knocked these sorts of developments, and they're bloody awful. So if you're going to have a retaining wall, right in the middle of something that stops you from getting from A to B, put a staircase in. It's not that hard, pretty obvious. So that deals with that matter. So just scrolling up. So these are the advice notes that sit under the conditions, and the advice notes just go into a little bit more detail on, for example, the landscaping. You'll see there's a whole list of the exact number of trees that ought to be aimed for and the like. And then advice note number 2, which I just reworded, so if we can scroll up to the new one, it's basically fairly similar. It's dealing with the same matter. It's dealing with the crossovers of the Amherst Street issue. And what it's trying to say is that, look, wall-to-wall crossovers, even if we were to impose the policy requirements of the city, which are, the crossovers need to be narrower and the like, they're still going to be wall-to-wall crossovers, and it's still going to present an environment in Amherst Street which is the antithesis of what it is that the community was calling for, and the council tried to write into its documentation. So there are other ways of dealing with that, but I actually think it shouldn't be the individual owner saying, "Oh, I've got a double garage, I want a crossover." It should be us as a community saying, "We didn't subdivide it that way. That's not how we wanted it. We're not going to fall for that. We're not just going to receive an application for a crossover and go, well, it's compliant, so we'll just tick that box. We're going to go out and actually try and come up with a design that mitigates the problem that's been caused by the Planning Commission and by the applicants, and see if there's a different way of approaching it that gives a better outcome for the community in consultation with the community." So that's what that clause is about. Is that all of them? It is. There you go. So hopefully that provides a reasonable explanation.
Any further comments?
So I would lastly say, I would get that some people might say, maybe we shouldn't be offering conditions of approval that JDAP, might see that as, you're having a bet each way sort of thing, so that gives them more license to go for an approval. I'm not convinced that that's the case. If I was to walk in and sense that JDAP was going to approve it, and then I just sort of sprung all of these on them, there's a very high probability that they would just say, it's too hard, we're just not going to, we're just going to approve it as per the officer's recommendation. So I want to make sure that these are up front and in front of JDAP, but obviously argue for what Councillor Groom has put forward.
Councillor Graham.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Can I just confirm in the structure plan, the residential density, the coding, and does this comply with it? I mean, I'm reading page 132, and it appears as if it does. Right through the office. Do you want me to go off?
It does. So it sits sort of in between that target density. It's not seeking above and beyond. That's effectively why the officer's recommendation is as it is, because they have met the density sought by the structure plan.
Councillor Lawler.
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for
Graham,
waiting for the question to be answered there, Mr. Chairman. Well, look, to me, therein lies the problem. So we've got to go back to 2017 when the structure plan was done, and we've just seen it on the item before. I think we pay scant regard to what's going to happen in 5, 6, 7, 8 years' time when we actually get a development application. And, you know, this applicant has read the structure plan. He's allowed to put in this density. He's got subdivision approval. So he's mostly, or he or the company's most probably ticked all the boxes, whereas council back in 2017 didn't. So anyway, I'm just making that point. There are similar developments around Freo. We've got it at Salatina Ridge, I think Fallwood down in South Fremantle, very similar looking development. So this isn't anything new in Fremantle, not saying that it's any good, but my problem is, okay, we knock this back. It goes to JDAP. JDAP say, oh, Fremantle Council's made a good decision. We'll uphold the refusal. And 6 months later, we get exactly the same similar type of application because the structure plan allows it and the subdivision is in approval. I mean, I'm just saying to the community, basically, be wary, be careful what you want for, because given what the council has said to the developers, given that the subdivision has been approved, you're not going to get anything different down there. It's going to come back time and time again, very similar. And the officers have to do their job and assess it and approve it because it meets all the guidelines. So that's basically what I'm saying. And good or bad, it's always going to be good or bad down there.
Councillor Lorber.
Yeah, just briefly, I just want to thank colleagues for putting together these amendments. I think they go a long way to putting words on the paper to how I felt about this project as well. And just something like this is actually the reason why I decided to run for council, because it feels like a developer is just trying to squeeze every possible dollar out of, in my opinion, every dollar out of this site and making the rest of the community pay for it. It really doesn't, in my mind, speak to anything around it. It's just going to be imposed on this area. And it's, while it may tick some boxes, Councillor Graham, it just does not feel like it's the right design or the right development for this block, or for this area. And the structure plan and the strategic plan speak to some of that stuff as well. So I'm supporting these two amendments because I really would like developers that are going to do these kinds of developments work with the community, because I feel like if you actually spent maybe half as much time talking to folks and working with folks to get a good outcome, it would probably actually even be less expensive in the end. So yeah, I just don't really like how this was put to us initially and how the planning process has played out. And hopefully we can take this as some learnings and make the changes we need to, so that way we can be more proactive in the future. Thanks.
Any further discussion before we go to a vote? Councillor Groom, you want to close?
I just want to take the opportunity, I guess, to respond to Councillor Graham in closing. So in our statement of reasons, we've set out 7 parts of the structure plan that this proposal doesn't deal with. So structure plans are much more than simply a density number. They describe the kind of character, the outcomes, the performance and function that we want from an area and from land and development within that area. Actually, I would welcome a development with greater density than this one for that site, and that's what the structure plan envisaged, was more density, more diversity of use and of dwellings. So I understand we may continue to get more back, but actually the history of development in this area generally has shown us that when we stand up for what we really clearly believe in, we get quite different outcomes, and that's what we are looking for.
Okay, we'll move to a vote then. All those in favour of the alternative recommendation? That's unanimous, so that will become the recommendation to JDAP. And members of the gallery, I would suggest you consider attending. It's no more formal than this. It's in this same room, so it should be fairly familiar, but you do need to register, and the officers can help you to do that. Okay, the next item is item 3, Gold Street, studio edition with loft, and Gerard McCann, the architect, wish to speak. 3 minutes starting now. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anything specific to say to the councillors except to perhaps answer any questions or queries or clarification that anyone needs.
Okay, are there any questions to the architect? Councillor Sullivan.
Can you just clarify, and you may be able to answer this, what the legal status of the walkway or dunny cart was and what it is now and how it got changed, just to clarify that, because it has been part of commentary.
That's right. It was originally this house, 25 Gold Street, was my first house in Fremantle, which was bought in 1977, and had additions and alterations done to it. The laneway at the back was about 2.7 metres from memory, and I built the current enclosure, which is a laundry and a wall along the back of the 3 lots. In those days, they were purple titles, and I went about the process with Nino Monaco in the good old days of having it converted to built strata. The current owners, the laneway has become really just a junk yard over the years, and the owners all approached me about what would be the possibility of using the land in some other way. And I said the only way to do it would be, in fact, to do a subdivision where the lane was reduced to all that it's used for, which is a pedestrian walkway, to the 3rd unit, which is number 29, and for rubbish bins. There was some objection because people said, oh, we'd like to take our trailer there, but in fact no one ever does take their trailer. And I think number 29 has got a storage shed there, which is on common property and illegal, obviously, but, you know, like most things, it's not causing any harm, so no one worries about it. So I did the subdivision to reduce the walkway to 1.7, and that was negotiated with all the 3 owners about what was an appropriate width to leave the bins there, which are 700, and allow 1 metre walkway, which is a man or a person or a woman or a they with a wheelbarrow. So it was the 1.7 that's left is predicated on a wheelbarrow and a rubbish bin. And then that gave approximately an extra 1 metre to numbers 25 and 27, both of whom were desirable of using that land because it wasn't being used. And then what that meant then was that both 25 and 27 could use that land in some other way. So the owners of 25 said they want to move back to the city. They're both academics, and they do a lot of international travelling and talking, and it's only a 2-bedroom house, and they would like studio space to actually have 2 studies. And so that was, then we used the extra 1 metre of the land.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. I will move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. As a seconder, Councillor Graham. Any discussion? Councillor Sullivan.
I support the officer's recommendation. I just wondered whether anyone else had a view about the short stay element of the recommendation. I understand people's concerns that something's going to be used for Airbnb, and we put in a clause and those sort of things. But we also have had a view in this council, and very much so in the community, that suggests that we're trying to look for all sorts of different diverse types of accommodation. And one of the things about having a studio and renting a studio out rather than renting the whole house out is that it actually allows for someone living in the house and then a little bit of Airbnb happening. Now, there's a much better outcome than someone buying a whole house and then Airbnb the whole thing. The other thing is that these sorts of studios, where the courtyard space is literally minuscule, they are shared. Like if you have a studio, it's a shared space. So the applicant hasn't actually asked for it. I get that it shouldn't be used as ancillary dwelling, but I just wonder, and I'm happy to invite officer comment as well, as to why that's included, whether that's just included in relation to a concern that was raised as part of the consultation, or whether that is seen as being a non-compliant use if it was a studio. I'd be interested to see whether we should scrub out that short-term accommodation bit of part 2.
Through the chair, there's a few parts to the condition. Firstly, yes, it is, I guess, in response to some of the commentary received during the neighbour notification period, and to make it abundantly clear to the owners and the applicants that it can't be an ancillary dwelling because of the common property element. So it's just simply can't be done. And the short-term accommodation component, it either needs to be the entire site that is rented out under our local law, or it needs to be changed in use to a B&B under the planning rules. So there's a few kind of twists and turns to the way the local law and the planning requirements work. A B&B use would allow someone to live on site and rent out components of the dwelling as well, which the studio is part of. But otherwise, the short stay needs to be, the whole thing needs to be short stay and not have someone living on site. So there's two sort of separate issues there.
So that the applicants could apply for a change of use at some point in the future, but our policies will have to change if that was the case.
The policy wouldn't necessarily have to change. They just might have to apply for the bed and breakfast land use. Deleting the condition wouldn't make any sort of material effect to the proposal as it's put to us now. It just is effectively making it very clear.
Applying for bed and breakfast, that's just a license, or is that a planning approval?
It would be a planning approval. I believe it's a discretionary use. It might even be an A use, which might need advertising.
Okay, any further discussion?
Look, I'm going to flag it. I'll move an amendment that we take out the words "or short-term accommodation" and see if I get a seconder.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Groom, can I just check with the office that even if we took that out, that would still apply. That prohibition would still apply. Yeah, and then, but
that's my point, is that it would still apply. The difficulty of putting it in is it raises expectations that, because of terminologies, I think might just sort of then potentially causes problems down the line. So, for example, if someone's living in there, and it might be an academic friend visiting, someone then complains to the council and say, "Oh, they're using it for Airbnb, or they're using it for this, or they're using it for that," and whatever. And we just get into this sort of long-winded arguments about these things sometimes. Whereas the reality is, if they were using it for Airbnb, they would need, as has been explained, they would need approval for the whole site. If they were using it as bed and breakfast, then they would need some form of approval for that. And if they were just renting it, a room to, somebody, then I'm still unclear in our planning world what that actually constitutes. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just renting a room. It's not either of those things. But the problem is we put that in there, and then someone starts complaining about it because they think that that's what that means.
So the amendment is simply to delete the words "or short-term accommodation." I mean, the ancillary dwelling is set in the codes anyway, isn't it? It can't be an ancillary dwelling. So we're deleting just the words "or short-term accommodation." That's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all's in favour? That's unanimous. So that's amended. Any further discussion on the item? Okay, so I'll move the item as amended. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. All right, if you'd like, you take your seats again, please. We'll reopen the meeting at 7:56 with item 4, 4 Ainsley Street, additions and alterations. There were 2 people to speak for the officer's recommendation, 1 against. I'll take the person against first so that the applicants can respond if they wish. So Sue Anderson, you're a neighbour.
Hi, good evening. I'm the owner of 2 Ainsley Road. The original proposal for 4 Ainsley Road sought 7 variations. I objected to the initial proposal and only 2 of the requested variations. These were firstly, significant overlooking from the proposed front upper terrace, 2.3 metres in lieu of 7.5 metres, and secondly, overshadowing. The revised proposal on today's agenda addressed the first by redesigning the terrace. The proponents have reduced the overshadowing, but unfortunately they have not fully understood the application of the relevant R code. They claim that the allowance is 100 square metres overshadowing and propose 104 square metres. However, the planning officer has correctly understood the code and noted the allowance for overshadowing is in fact 73.8 square metres. The discrepancy relates to the fact that my block of land has 2 northern neighbours and the R codes apportion overshadowing between those 2 northern neighbours. The planning officer in their recommendation then goes on to justify this overshadowing of 104 square metres in lieu of 73.8 square metres, an increase of 41%, by stating in the agenda at page 268 that any new design on my block can accommodate a future outdoor living area unaffected by shadow from this dwelling. R Code's design principle 5.4.2 aims to protect solar access. It requires consideration of outdoor living areas where they exist. It does not entertain consideration of possible future designs. I would like you all to read 5.4.2 for yourselves, and as I repeat, the relevant design principle protects solar access to neighbouring lots. To exceed it by 41% and use a justification outside of the design principles appears to be a travesty to me. Further, I have another northern neighbour at 8 Rule Street. What if they want a 2-storey addition and the planner applies the same logic? My lot is then overshadowed on both sides by an excess of 41%, 140 square metres in lieu of 100 square metres. I can understand and accept a 10% variation, but not a 41% variation. So I urge you to either reject the current proposal so that a redesign to protect solar access can take place against the correct application of the R codes. Secondly, defer to allow the proponents to consider the correct interpretation of the R codes as they have worked to an incorrect understanding. Or thirdly, approve with a condition to get the overshadowing down to say 80 to 85 square metres in lieu of 73.8 square metres. So that would be an 8 to 15% variation rather than a 41% variation. Good design solved the overlooking and the heritage issues, and I believe good design can solve the overshadowing issue.
Can I just clarify something? On page 211 of the agenda, you're agreeing with the figures put by the council officers, is that correct? But you're disputing the figures put in by the applicant?
Yes.
Okay. So page 211 is accurate in your view.
Well, I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm...
Yeah, well, it's your figures, 73.3 and 104. Yeah, okay. Can I just get a comment? Any questions from the neighbour? No, thanks.
Thank you.
I'll just get a comment from the officer on that particular point before we go any further on the assessment, difference in assessment between the applicant and the officers.
I'm pretty happy with the assessment in the report, if that's what you're asking, sorry,
Yeah,
Chair.
But the applicant submitted different figures?
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, the diagram is okay, but it comes back to Ms. Anderson's point about the shared northern boundary. So it would be what the codes try and do is make sure that each property isn't overshadowed in total by more than 25% in this instance. So you can't sort of let every northern property, because in some instances, some properties have 3, 4 properties to the north. So,
right. Thank you. We have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm actually Simone Robeson. We're going to swap because we're both speaking tonight. I firstly like to say the planning officer and heritage officer have put forward justifications for a variation, so I'm not going to rehash any of that tonight. I just want to make a few points, specifically to have a chance to respond to Councillor Groom's objection that we received this morning, and also to the neighbour who just spoke then. I just want to clarify about this confusion for the overshadowing. So it's true, our first application, we did get it wrong. We had the wrong calculation. We did a lot of work before we submitted this application. We had Zooms with Heritage Office planning officers to make sure that we were all okay. It was never raised. I think the confusion came from we're on a 45-degree angle, and this definition of northern boundary wasn't picked up by either us or the council at the time. Once we found out, we quickly rectified it and we reduced our overshadowing by 18 metres square straight off the bat. So I just wanted to start with that. Jumping back to the objection we received this morning, the objection stated, the cumulative effect of the additional height and reduced setback is excessive overshadowing of the neighbouring site, which will be detrimental to solar access and daylight. The first point I want to make is that we don't believe a 7.6% variation, which is as per the report states, should be considered excessive, especially given the proposal and the variation is in line with all other developments on the street. And secondly, the overshadowing is not detrimental. Yes, it has impact, like every overshadowing does, but detrimental defined as exceedingly harmful or irreparable, given there is ample opportunity for solar access to both windows and outdoor living areas of any future development on this lot to the rear of the site, which Lauren, my colleague, will touch on in a minute and go into a bit more detail about that. The second part of the objection, the councillor notes that the undeveloped nature of the site is not grounds for an exemption. I just want to be very clear, we've never used this for justification. We are basing our justifications on the typical and expected pattern of development for a lot with this orientation and in this particular location, looking at precedents on the street. In summary, we do not comply, not because our addition is too tall or excessively scaled, but because we are sharing this overshadowing allowance with another property and because of the significantly sloped nature of the site. This is what tipped us over by the 7.6%, and this is what triggers the need for discretion. We clearly meet the design principles as outlined in the report and have already made changes to alleviate the impact to the neighbour. I want to stress that we aren't proposing anything controversial here. It's a really simple, modest addition. We've got a lot of heritage overlays at play here as well. And we've tried to be very reasonable and considerate within the constraints to design a modest first floor extension, enabling this family to stay in their property for the long term. And now I'll just let Lauren take over, or if there's any, perhaps can we ask questions at the end once Lauren's spoken?
You can ask questions and you can choose which one of you wants to answer. Yeah,
okay, fine. Sure. Thank you.
That's Lauren Benson.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to add further points to what Simone said. We wanted to note while the council refers to the shared boundary with number 2 Ainsley as their northern boundary, the properties are at a 45-degree alignment to due north, meaning that number 2 Ainsley, as is the case for our lot, has 2 northern boundaries with equal access to northern light. We pushed the first floor as far reasonably possible to the northeast and staggered the walls to the southwest to reduce the impact to number 2 Ainsley. We balanced the heritage requirement of a large street setback with not wanting to go too far back where the overshadowing to 2 Ainsley would increase. Hence, the first floor plan has the bulk of the area to the northeast side. Again, this first floor development is in no way excessive, obvious, or out of line with the other developments in the street. In fact, we propose greater setbacks and lower heights in the majority of the developments in the area, and this is noted in the planning officer's report. Despite this, we worked with the planning officer and made several significant amendments in response to the objections made by our neighbour at number 2 Ainsley, dropping the top of wall heights throughout by up to half a metre and increasing the balcony setback by a further 2.8 metres. These changes also reduced ceiling heights in habitable rooms to 2.6 and non-habitable rooms to 2.1, which is the minimum ceiling height achievable under the NCC codes. We also note that the overshadowing starts 11 metres from the rear boundary of number 2 Ainslie, allowing for a sizable garden in full sun, noting the R codes call for a minimum 4x4 uncovered outdoor space. To address the design principles, it's unreasonable to suggest that the only opportunity for solar access to both windows and outdoor habitable areas for the neighbouring property is located within the proposed overshadowing zone. It is obvious and advantageous given the northern light to the desired outdoor living areas to be placed at the rear of the property at 2 Ainslie. The fact that this block is empty makes no difference to our argument. Given we are requesting discretion in this matter, we'd like to note that while we are required to share the total overshadowing allowance with number 8 Rural Street, the reality is the house is heritage listed. Similar to our proposal, no secondary story additions are permitted over the existing cottage. Thereby, we can't reasonably expect any significant overshadowing from this property. Note if the existing heritage house of our property was raised by only half a metre, we would hit the maximum permitted overshadowing, effectively rendering this lot undevelopable with any significant second story. And in regards to the proposed garage design, this proposed design has the exact same size bulk and size as the existing already approved carport. The only changes to the existing approved design is swapping to the solid timber fence with a more permeable solid limestone fence to better tie into the streetscape. The swapping of the use of this carport to a garage has the support of the Heritage Officer as per the reason stated in her report. Note there's a lot of other examples of non-permeable full height garages and garage walls along this street, and we believe ours is an improvement on what is there. Thank you.
Any questions from the applicant's representatives? Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, so just clarifying the point that you're making, I suppose, on the overshadowing. Is it the case that because of the way the blocks slope, that as soon as you build a building in any part of the block, the shadow falls on a much lower part of the adjoining lot? Is that the gist of what you're saying? And that obviously applies to every property?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And secondly, the carport that was approved, can you just run me through what was actually approved? Because I'm not sure we had the actual approved drawings.
Yeah.
So was it an open roof with a fence along the side?
There was approved carport roller door. It's approved as permeable.
It was approved with a door?
It was approved with the door. It was just never built. So our proposal is just adding the door that's already been approved. And this is what the proposal had, was the 1.8 metre fence with a 300mm gap and then more CFC panelling above. And if you see our proposal, we're just proposing to fill in that gap but create more permeability through these hit and miss cutouts in the brickwork to get better airflow and just improve the overall design.
Okay, and just the last question. I mean, the design, and unfortunately the drawings weren't great in the documents, but the upper floor has essentially a flat roof.
Correct.
Yeah. So that does make it difficult to lower the wall heights on the south side. Had you give consideration to ways of perhaps introducing a different architectural form that would have potentially significantly changed the overshadowing?
Like if you see over the stairwell, it might be hard to see on the drawings if they've been scaled. We had a parapet wall at the front of the house, and we've opted to have a eaves gutter there, allowing to have that 500mm reduction that we mentioned in the report. So by dropping to have an eaves gutter over that area, we've tried to lower that. So we've tried to lower that area over the stair as much as possible without making the design, trying to keep the design clean.
Yeah, I think that exactly, to know with the heritage house, there's a lot going on there. We did want to keep the forms really clean and simple. We didn't want to introduce too much else. And Also, we did a lot of work to make sure this extension couldn't even be seen from the street as well. It's only this kind of awkward approach you can see it. But yeah, we've reduced ceiling space throughout, and also ceiling space above the ceiling between the top of roof and ceiling space to get it down as much as we can.
Any further questions? Thank you. So I suggest we discuss the officer's recommendation. If that fails, we can then move the referral. So I will move the officer's recommendation for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Graham. Any discussion? Councillor Groom.
This is one of those proposals that seeks a long list of discretions, I think 7 when I last counted it. And that always kind of raises the question of what's the cumulative impact of that, which I guess is the nature of my comments. And the commentary on it being a blank site was a kind of direct response to one of the officer recommendations, so not making any claims against what the proponent has said. But, you know, it always falls down for me that when we want variations on how close things are to boundaries and we want variations on height and we don't meet overshadowing requirements, you know, those 3 things inevitably go together. The protection of solar access isn't all about outdoor space. It's actually about people getting winter sun on their living room windows into their house and reducing the use of fossil fuel for heating and cooling. So, you know, I do stand by those concerns, and I understand that everything's being done to reduce height, but we can reduce size as well. Like sometimes we can't have everything we want on a site because of what that site is. So kind of my concerns stand that those impacts will have an overshadowing impact on that site, which is sort of beyond which the scheme seeks to protect, or the R codes seek to protect. I wasn't aware of the full details of the garage that's been concerned, so I'll probably not stand by that comment, but our local planning policy and our residential streetscape policy doesn't normally approve a garage like that on the street. There isn't a great precedent for garages to the street with a 0 setback in that street. There are plenty of garages close to the street, but that built form is not anywhere else on that street. And it really does intrude not only into the streetscape, but on the kind of dominant feature of that heritage house. It really erodes it. So, you know, I'm not supportive of that. I accept that if it's a pre-existing approval, we'll walk away from that, and I find it disappointing. But yeah, as it's proposed, I find it hard to support, and simply would be seeking a referral if this doesn't get up, so that we get a chance to kind of massage some of those features.
Any further discussion or comments? Mayor Fitzharding.
I'm happy for Councillor Sullivan to go first if he wants to. Look, I'm really line ball on this. Some people probably know that I grew up on Ainsley Road, and you know, houses in this area have got a lot larger, and don't think there's any stopping that at this point in time. You know, it's not close enough to give me a conflict, but my mum continues to live on Ainsley Road and in the only house that has not been massively expanded. So I don't think that's the tide we're going to stem anytime soon. I do feel like an effort has been made here to minimise the impacts. I think, in fact, the built form, even the heritage built form in that area, does tend to have people living exceptionally close to each other. That is part of the structure of it. The fact a lot of this area was developed before cars really means that across the road you do have a couple of garages that open literally onto the footpath. Yeah, it's super tricky. I guess I look at what this the precedent set by the corner block. Corner of Ainsley and Rule disturbs me because I don't know how that one was approved. That doesn't fit in with the character of the area at all. I think the fact that there's a retention of the sort of character frontage of the house is a positive thing. So, Yeah, I'm pretty much line ball. I feel like sending this back to the drawing board isn't necessarily going to substantially change where we end up. So I'll think about it while I listen to other people.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks. Equally, I'm on the fence about this. Listening to the discussion from the applicants, you can tell that a lot of effort has gone into what is a very difficult site, and a lot of the sites in Fremantle are like this, with ranging topography and houses built so close together. But also listening to some of the comments from my colleagues as well, if we can have an opportunity to defer the item and look for opportunities to massage or slightly improve this property for the benefit of the neighbour, I would be in support of that.
Any further discussion? Councillor Sullivan.
Thanks. I guess I'm similar to the mayor. I mean, I think the notion of developing on the hills of North Fremantle has always been a challenge because everybody, it's such an amazing place to live, and I've lived there myself as well, and had to deal with the realities of people wanting to build up high and cast shadows and look over the top of your own house, and frankly, I kind of always accepted it because everybody kind of like is all wanting to look in the same direction and do roughly the same thing as everybody else is wanting to do. And that's, I guess that's what the applicant is arguing, is that what they're proposing is, they've tried to be as respectful as they can, and they've given effectively a reasonable opportunity for the neighbour to develop something similar or still be able to develop something that will be quality accommodation. And they get to actually adapt, which is almost unique in North Fremantle. That said, the percentage over, I mean, I always like to see every possible thing done to a design that can be done. And I do look at the staircase and I go, look, I understand architecturally why there's this sort of desire, even though it's been reduced a little bit, to keep it simple, flat roof, or the like. But it's not necessarily a part of the building that is going to make or break the architectural experience for the people living in it, because it's at the side. And if it makes a significant difference to the shadowing, and look, it might make 4 square metres or 5 square metres or 6 square metres of difference to the shadow. It's not going to get it compliant or whatever. But if that's what makes a difference, then I would be convinced that the applicant's gone the extra mile, in a sense, to try and get it to closer to that compliant. So in that sense, the notion of a little bit of a tweak is worthwhile. I agree with Councillor Graham in the sense of the garage. I was surprised, and as soon as I saw it, I said, well, that's not going to get approved. But the bulk of it's been approved already, so modifying it is okay. I can sort of understand where the officers probably came from in improving it. At least these houses, unlike many houses in heritage areas, these houses are almost 2-story high houses. They're set up so high that having a very discreet, flat carport structure is probably reasonable. I was a bit surprised that the garage doors part of the approval. I was going to ask, perhaps if that can just be confirmed that that's what has been approved. If I can ask that question.
Through the chair, Councillor Sullivan, it was. So I believe it references a visually permeable garage door, which is actually allowable under the R codes, funnily enough.
So that aspect's not been changed. It's still the same visually permeable garage door, or at least that could be conditioned if it was to be approved.
Bear with me for just one moment. I'm just double checking. Yeah, it's confirmed on the plans that the previous DA approved permeable roller door is remaining.
Any further comments? Are you ready to vote? Okay, so we're voting on the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. All those in favour? Be awkward if it has to go to council as if it's 4-2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4-3 possibly. All those against? 3. So that's carried, but needs to go to council for ratification. Okay. In which case there'll be a chance to move deferral again.
And I would make the view that if I saw a commitment to a revision, to that stair, I'd swing.
Okay, so just for the benefit of the applicants, the committee needs 5 votes to make a decision, and when that vote was 4-3, which means it needs to go to council, which will be in the 4th Wednesday of this month. There is an opportunity for you to put plans in before that to address the concerns you've heard. If you make changes before that, it could be, I mean, basically this way, we don't know which way the council will vote. If you wanted to firm up the chances of the council supporting it, you could make changes before that, or you could leave it as it is and go to full council with the same plans. Okay. So it's going to council with an approval recommendation, but without the power of delegation. Okay, is that clear? Yeah. Okay. If you're not clear, you can check with the officers tomorrow. Item
Back again. Yes, hello, I'm the architect, and I am just wanting to speak very briefly to this. There was a comprehensive cover letter and drawings and diagrams that went with the application. It is recommended for approval, and I'd like to support that. The only reason I wanted to speak is just because there's some slight discrepancy in how the assessment has been made in regards to the discretions we're seeking. We believe that the scheme proposed complies in its north side setback. It's one of the items that is raised as being requiring discretion. The other is visual privacy, and the other is open space. In regards to the side setback to the north, the report notes that a 3-metre setback would be required, but in our calculations, the setback is compliant at 1.2 metres, given that the entire north elevation is screened. It consists of a non-habitable room, which is a bathroom, an open staircase, basically between the screen and the building, and a bedroom which looks essentially west with a tiny section of window looking north at the very front of the addition. And so we do not believe that that wall or that elevation can be assessed as a wall with a major opening. So that's on that one. The visual privacy to the north, where the roof deck is set back from the boundary and is permanently screened, preventing visual overlooking into the back to the east and over to the north, as well as separated by the distance, as was sort of pointed out in the report. And so we believe that that complies, as well as we're not seeking a discretion in that respect, as well as the open space calculation. The report says that we've achieved 40% open space. However, in our diagram, we measure the open space to be just over 50%. 50% is what's required. And I suppose we feel that we comply with that, and we're not seeking any discretion. We are seeking a discretion in relation to LPP 2.9 for the primary street setback, as is noted in the report. We're asking for a R code compliant setback against the LPP 2.9, which requires a 10-metre setback, and that relates to the fact that the existing house sits on a very small, shallow block that is only 245 square metres big. The existing house sits basically within 1 metre of the street, so the setback of the house itself is significantly closer than what is allowed for in LPP 2.9. It is a heritage house, and the addition has been designed to be very respectful of its heritage condition. It does not overshadow, so that's in its favour. Anybody, and it is. I would just ask for the support of the committee, but I just wanted to clarify. From our point of view, we feel we comply with all of those conditions.
I don't know if the officers have seen those comments with time to respond to them. I saw them this afternoon. I don't know if you've had the no. So if we approve it, you'll be happy. But if we don't want to approve it, it will have to be deferred. I think is the issue. So well, let's. Any questions to the applicant? Councillor Lorver.
It also talks about on the northern boundary roof deck. Is that correct?
There's a roof deck. Yep.
So the setback required for that is greater than 1.2. So you are seeking a discretion on that.
The setback, I suppose, would be 7.5 if it was deemed to comply, or screened, permanently screened, is the or. So the height of the wall and the elements are compliant setback, and the item, the roof terrace is screened. So it's the or.
Any further questions? Thank you. So look, the way I propose we deal with this is let's debate the item. If it's supported, there's no problem, and if there's no support for it, we'll defer to council to allow the officer to respond to some of those questions. Is everybody happy with that? So I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Any discussion? Councillor Groom.
I guess for Councillor Lorver's sake, so I did contact the manager this week about a couple of the officer comments, and one in particular was the officer was talking about, well, implying that the deck wasn't screened for looking to the rear, but on the drawings it clearly is. So I think the officer's got a bit of confusion about where the screening is and is not. So I'm kind of satisfied that it's doing that. It's certainly been screened to the effect that it's only looking forward out over the street. Yep. And I hadn't picked up the interpretation of the wall, but I get that there's no major opening, so that's probably correct. I didn't have any major concerns otherwise anyway.
Councillor Graham.
I just these decks are a bugbear of mine, so I'm not happy about roof decks, and that's being incorporated into the open space requirements and all that. So yeah, I wouldn't suggest changing any of this because I don't think the immediate neighbours they've mostly seen this recommendation and haven't come in tonight. But if you start tinkering with it now, that'd be unfair for the immediate neighbour to the north.
Any further comments? All ready to vote. So all those in favour of the recommendation for approval? That's all but Councillor Graham. Against Councillor Graham. Thank you. So that's a decision by delegation tonight. We'll talk to the officers tomorrow. Item 6, Bellevue Terrace, Matt Delroy Carr. And just whilst we're waiting, I'll just draw council's attention. I did send it around an email this afternoon, ask people to look at it. We do have a printed copy here from a neighbour. If you haven't seen a copy, we can get one to you. One here. So if you just let us know if you haven't seen that, we can pass that around. Okay, Mr. Delroy Carr.
Evening. My name's Matt Delroy Carr. I'm representing MDC Architects and my clients Stephen Handley and Leith Groves of 10 Bellevue Terrace. We're here in support of the officer's recommendation for approval, and I'm going to talk specifically to the garage component of the proposal, as the other aspects are fairly minor in nature. So we're proposing a garage addition replacement of an existing carport roof that is currently on site. The main points of contention have been discussions around overshadowing with the neighbour, as well as the non-conforming with LPP 2.9 with the garage, effectively a nil setback, barring a very small setback. So we've been working in consultation with the neighbours to try and be amenable. We've reduced the height of the garage to limit the overshadowing to them, limit the limit the effect of any additional overshadowing, which is picked up as only I think 3%, or 3 square metres of extra. And the purpose of the garage really is just, as my client's right, to have the ability to have a lockable, secure space on the street front, and we've worked hard to ensure that this doesn't compromise the integrity of the streetscape. It doesn't create a solid abutment to the street. It's permeable. It addresses vehicle egress and access to the site, as well as pedestrian sightlines. And first and foremost, I mean, the whole purpose of this garage is really to increase the plot ratio area of the green plot ratio area on the site, so that the planted roof enables what was currently just a sort of effectively solid shade sail to be a green space. The site's got a fantastic piece of amenity, and it's got this lovely green setback to the street. It's got a very rich, lush green setback to the rear, and to compromise any of them would be detrimental. So the storage and garage component we see as being additional green space, whilst seeking compromise and variation to the local planning policy. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Any questions from the committee? Thank you. Now, we were asked to make sure this was presented because the neighbours can't be here. It's from Stacey and Rob Town. I just want to verify that the committee have all seen it. Otherwise, we'll have to read it out. All seen it? Yeah. And that includes photographs of the streetscape and setbacks. Okay, so that's from Stacey and Rob Town, I think, are the immediate neighbours. Okay, the officer's recommendation is for approval. I move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sullivan. Any discussion? Councillor Groom.
So we're in this really interesting position. We've considered 3 developments today, all of which present double car garages. Well, one was single, but right on the street. One of them's the brand new development that we've all just thrown out of, all agree is not what we want. But now we're looking at these garages in existing streetscapes. And this one, it's completely out of context with the streetscape. There is no other garage, anything like it in this street. And I guess the question we have to ask ourselves, is this the way we want our streets to go in Fremantle? Because once we've approved one, we'll slowly be approving more. We have a local planning policy that says this is not the urban form we agree with. If we go to the R codes, it says it's not the urban form that's envisaged. And really our policy says that we would actually prefer garages were not even in a line with the front wall. We want them sent back. We don't want them to be prominent. We don't want to be a car community. So as long as we've still got that policy framework in place, I find it hard to support these that just set a precedent that, we end up with a street of double car garages right on the street front, and it totally changes the streetscape, the way people interact with their neighbours, all aspects of it. So, I think this is a good design and a clever solution, and I understand all the drivers. But the conversation we need to have is this what we want to start happening in the old streets in Fremantle? And I guess that's something for all the councillors to consider.
There is an alternative recognition for refusal if this fails, but I'll ask if there's any other speakers for the motion to approve. Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, I mean, I have a fair degree of sympathy with what Councillor Graham has just said. Had this been in Solomon Street, the next street up, there would be lots of precedents for exactly this proposal. And it also, there's a part of it that goes to that sort of Hilltown argument that I was making before as well, and that you, in certain areas in this precinct and also in North Fremantle, where using the topography this way makes some sense. And so I kind of have some sympathy for that, and the fact that it's sort of, in a sense, it feels like it's sort of reinstating a little bit of the limestone and putting a garden on top. So there's I have that sympathy as well. A little bit line ball on this one. The other thing to say about this end of Bellevue Terrace is it's quite different to the cul-de-sac end to and increasingly so as you get up the top end, because it starts getting a lot of high walls and it's a dead end street and you've got sort of a buildings that confront you at the end of the street and everything. So I'm going to be a little bit interested to see what others say, but a little bit further up the street, there are the sort of elements that you get in Solomon Street, i.e., you get retaining walls right on the street. They're sort of fence height in Solomon Street. They're more than fence height. They're whole stories. But of course, you get up to the Clopper building and it's got a sort of solid wall and the like. So the part of me is, if this was in the non-cul-de-sac end of Bellevue Terrace, I probably wouldn't have a bar of it. I'm a little bit line ball on this one, so I don't know how everyone else is thinking.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks. Yeah, I too am on the fence about this one, and I was thinking, as Councillor Sullivan mentioned, about examples that you see on Solomon Street with the garage at the front and then the living space created on top. It can work, and it does bring, while at the street level it might be closed off, if the people are using the space above the carport, it can have some kind of engagement or interaction with the street as well. So that's why I was sitting line ball on it. Yeah, keen to hear what everyone else wants to say about this one.
Mayor Fitzharding.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everyone else, a bit line ball. I mean, I think one of the assumptions we're making is that garages are only for cars, and I appreciate that, that's what they're designed for. But I also know on streets where you get quite a lot of elevation off the street, you are looking for somewhere to park your bikes and your bins and your scooter and your, So it is about creating spaces for all of the other things that we might use and want to have at a street level. I tend to agree with this one that with Councillor Sullivan's point that this is not a form that's uncommon around this area, and in fact, you've got some houses we'd consider kind of more heritagey, these sort of, I guess, 60s, maybe 40s houses with those big, street level kind of elevations that, sort of form part of what we see as being a bit of a traditional Freo house, probably a little more Italianate than this one. So yeah, I'm probably in the mind to support this one personally.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, look, I won't sit on the fence, Mr. Chair. I went up the street today and to have a look at it because I haven't been up it for 100 years, and it's a real eclectic little street of mismatch, really. I mean, you name it, it's in there. You've got beautiful little cottages, you've got a fair amount of rubbish sort of development. You've got the units up the top there, which I think are owned by the Humiches or somebody. So it's all there in this, 300 metres. But I do think with the rooftop garden, that's what sort of swung me on this one. And I noticed he had a scooter in his little driveway, and someone tried to pinch my scooter the other day. So luckily it was locked up, but I noticed this guy's wasn't. So he might be better off having a carport where he can keep it locked up. But yeah, look, I think it'll fit in pretty well, and I'm prepared to support it.
Any further discussion? Microphone on. Before we close the discussion, Councillor Sullivan, you're speaking.
I was just gonna, sorry, the garage door on the structure, is that solid or is it? So did you say what percentage?
Check that is actually on 70? The plan.
Yeah, so.
Do you want to verify that that's actually shown on the plan?
Or
it
could
just add a
be
condition?
simply conditioned anyway, so.
Can you
like
check
that
where
one in Ainsley Road obviously had been as well.
Is that a standard condition now? If a garage door is on the street front, it has to be perforated? Or it's, okay. microphone's on. Yeah.
Sorry, trying to do three things at once at the moment. No, only if it's considered a carport. So it can still be a carport with a visually permeable door at the front. This is a garage. It's enclosed. The plans are very clear in showing that the side panels are visually permeable, and I'm just in the process of checking the details of the door. But that was my understanding as per the architect's comments, that it was intended to be.
So we'll just wait for you to check that, and if we need to add a condition to verify that, we'll do so. Any further discussion whilst we're waiting? Perhaps if we add a condition anyway, even if it's superfluous. Yep. Councillor Sullivan, would like to speak?
Yeah, no, I just was going to suggest that we add that condition, and I'd be happily move it as an amendment. That does make a significant difference.
Just confirming it is clearly marked on there as visually permeable garage door.
Okay, so we don't need to condition it. Okay, so that's fine. So we're ready to vote. All those in favour of the approval? That's carried with Councillor Groom against. Thank you. So that's a delegated decision tonight. Item 7, Bromley Road. The neighbour spoke earlier against this. I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Graham. The neighbour's main objection was impact on his windows and outdoor space. Would you like to comment on that? I'll just give you a minute to think about it. My understanding was that there wasn't any much greater impact than the existing fence, but
that's correct, Chair. The structure is proposed to be 2.8 metres in height. A standard boundary fence is 1.8 metres. The majority of the windows on that elevation are highlight windows and are under an eave. So from officers' perspective, the impact is, there will be an impact. There'll be a structure there, but it is minimal impact.
Okay. So I'll move the officer's recommendation. Did I do this already? We've done that. For the seconder? Sorry. Okay. Any discussion? Councillor Lorber.
Just a question, because the person who came and spoke, who talked about indirect sunlight, and I know overshadowing is overshadowing, but is there any validity to the argument of in the indirect sunlight is not going to be as high as it could be today if this is approved?
It's access to direct sunlight is a consideration when someone is seeking a reduced boundary setback, so it is something to consider.
Mayor Fitzharding.
I guess I'm trying to work out, I don't know if it's really not necessarily a consideration, but number 30 Bromley Road, how old is the house next door? Because, I mean, it just strikes me as being extremely close to the fence and probably not in a traditional Hilton way. So I'm just curious to know if it's a recent build and, you know, as we've seen, houses creep closer to fences. Anyway, it's probably speculation more than anything else. I had a similar question to Councillor Lawless, but I think you've answered that.
I don't have an answer immediately at hand, but I can quickly check through the aerial photos, which should tell us pretty quickly how old the house is.
Councillor Groom.
Oh, yeah, I agree that the neighbouring house is very close to the boundary, but I guess the sense check I did in my head was what could be on the subject site, and quite reasonably there could be a double-storey house on the subject site, and even if that wasn't really close to the boundary, it would have the kind of impact on overall kind of daylight access or background light access, if you like, as this kind of proposal did. So that was my little sense check. I mean, I know that the neighbour will notice that there's less kind of ambient light in their house, but they are close to a boundary, and it is, at a suburban setting, so we do all get some of those impacts from neighbours.
Any further comments? Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, this is the one. This house is 2 doors up from one we dealt with just recently. And so I sort of like know the area reasonably well. I walked up and down it extensively and actually admired the applicant's house, thinking, "Oh, that's a ripper." But the reality is, I don't have a problem with a short length of parapet wall. Typically, that would be a sort of a default approval for me. I recognise that in Hilton there is a little bit less planning justification for that. Certainly, there are some concerns in Hilton for those sort of things, but that's not what's causing the problem. I have sympathy for the neighbour, but when you build a house that's described in planning terms as a Ned Kelly house, which means you end up with a very minimal setback, and then you put an eave that covers most of that setback, you don't leave much space between a typical fence and the sky, and that's what this house has done. And even though you can have an 1800 high fence and then another couple of 400 mils, I think it is, with trellis that can have vegetation on it, and not a lot to complain about, and therefore you've virtually cut out your entire view to the sky. So the problem is not in the parapet wall per se. The problem is in the design. Luckily for them, they can change that. I mean, if they really want, if they wanted more access to light, then modify the roof a little bit. Put some, I know it's a lined eave, but modify the eave a bit and put some alcinite sheeting in the roof or whatever, to modify that, because the design of the house was inherently not trying to pick up that light in the first place. It just wasn't inherently responding to the need to do that. So I have sympathy, but you have to. It works both ways. You have to design your house to want it in the first place, not complain about it when someone's modifying a very small amount of the height next door.
Any further, Councillor Lorva?
I don't see any reason to go against the officer recommendation on this one, but I just, for Councillor Sullivan's sake, when we start talking about modifying roof pitches and roofing materials, I think you might have given our heritage officers a little heart attack when they bring those suggestions in the Hilton area. So it's not as easy as doing those kinds of adjustments as it might be in other parts of Fremantle. But I don't see any reason to go against the officer recommendation.
Any further discussion? We're to vote. Okay, I'll move the officer recommendation for approval. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Now the next two items are council items, so they have to go to council anyway, and they're to go out for advertising. I haven't had any comment from anyone about them. Item 8 is about telecommunications. The very limited powers we have over telecommunications infrastructure has been reviewed. We still have very little. So I'll move item 8. It's to go to council for approval to go out for advertising. So there's plenty of time to discuss it between now and council and during the advertising period. So can I move that? Seconder? The Mayor, thank you. All those in discussion? All those in favour? That's unanimous. Item 9, similarly, an update of the Oval Conservation Plan. It is an important issue, but it's, again, going to council and it's going out for advertising, and it's fairly minor tidy up. So I'll move item 9. Seconder, Councillor Graham. All the discussion?
Just quickly flag, I won't go into any detail tonight. I do have a little bit of concern about where we've landed with the heritage views, or the view corridors through the site, and I wouldn't mind sort of having a bit of a review about that. So I sort of raise it in advance, because maybe the officers might want to have a think about that as well.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Information report item 10. I don't think there's much there to ask any questions on, so I'll move that. Seconder, Councillor Graham. Any questions? All those in favour? I accept the report. Item 11, motions with previous business. There are non-urgent business, non-late items, non-confidential business, close the meeting at 8:50. Thank you for your attendance and cooperation.